At the beginning of chapter 3, we read, do we deliberate about everything? And is everything a possible subject of deliberation? Or is deliberation impossible about some things? We ought presumably to call not what a fool or madman would deliberate about, but what a sensible person would deliberate about, a subject of deliberation. Now, about eternal things, no one deliberates. For example, about the material universe or the incommensurability of the diagonal in the side of a square. Deliberation is a kind of thinking about. When we deliberate, we're thinking about courses of action. Not everything is a possible course of action, and some courses of action have ends so absurd or bad that we shouldn't waste our time thinking about them. Two categories of things we shouldn't deliberate about, and notice this is a normative claim, not a descriptive claim, are some of the things people with certain mental defects might think about, and things that are unchangeable. As to the former, Aristotle seems to have in mind both those with mental defects produced through the action of the person, say fixation on bad ends, and those who have some organic malfunction in their mental apparatus. We also don't deliberate about eternal things, things that cannot be a course of action, no matter how much thought we put into them. His example here is of the incommensurability of the diagonal in the side of a square. Unless you're a certain kind of geometrician, that language may be opaque to you. Draw a square on a piece of paper. Notice what it is that makes it a square. There is a closed figure with four sides of equal length, connected by right angles. There are four sides, four right angles. Now draw a diagonal line between any two opposite angles. Now you see two right triangles. Each of the four sides is equal in length. How about the diagonal? Is the diagonal also equal in length to those sides? It not only isn't, but it cannot be. Just consider your Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. A and B are sides, C is the diagonal. This is the unchanging reality Aristotle is pointing to. We can explore the nature of the nature of triangles in our trigonometry class. We can use the Pythagorean theorem in a number of applications, but we don't deliberate about it, though it might feature in our deliberations about other things, like, for example, how we travel. We might recognize that a straight line, the diagonal, is the shortest distance between 2 points and plan our travel accordingly. At 1112b, line 12, Aristotle says, we deliberate not about ends, but about means. My first thought is to dispute this claim. In our book, assuming you're reading the printed version, not an online version, you see the asterisk. You go to the note on page 220. I read there, this surprising claim can be made more plausible by two considerations. First, deliberation presupposes an end to be achieved. Hence, the doctor at the patient's bedside deliberates how to, but not whether to, cure her. Second, the term translated means is literally the things that promote the ends. You'll notice first that our editor has the same initial qualms as I do about this claim. She calls it a surprising claim that can be made more plausible, as if on the face it is not plausible. Do your two considerations convince you? Using what may be more simple language, let's think about deliberation as asking the question, how do I get from here to there? The there may be a location, maybe a state of being, or a desired outcome more generally. Deliberation requires an already identified there before we begin to think about it. That is, deliberate about it, the means of getting there. Since the there is already known, we can use our knowledge of our end, our desired destination, as a tool for our deliberations to evaluate proposed means to that end. But how do we know which there we should choose when there are so many possible? Isn't asking this question a matter of deliberating about ends, not just means? It certainly seems that way. But remember the hierarchical ordering of ends that we saw in Book 1. When we deliberate about which there we ought to aim at, we do so with some larger end or larger there in mind. At this point in our reasoning process, what was earlier in our discussion, not in our process, an end, a telos, is now, or was then, a means to that larger end. Let's consider a real-world example. We have the end in mind, going to college. We can deliberate about going to college. Our deliberations will include things like preparing ourselves academically and financially. We also will deliberate about how to get to the college. We might drive our car, ride a bike, take a bus, or walk. These deliberations about how to go to college, going to college is the end, the there. It's a given. We could also deliberate about going to college. In a world where our end is doing well in life, going to college functions as a possible means to that end, alongside other possible means like get a job, play video games, travel the world, join the military, spend a lot of time in the library, reading and educating myself. The phrase going to college appears in both of these deliberations. In the first as the end, the telos. In that case, it is fixed. We don't deliberate about it, we deliberate toward it. The second situation, the end is doing well in life. That is fixed in this case. Going to college now becomes a means we deliberate about. At 1113a, line 22, Aristotle notes, now different things appear good to different people, and, if it so happens, even contrary things. Reading this, I have two thoughts. First, it strikes me as plainly obvious. People want different things. People want what they want because they judge them to be good. We humans have a variety of opinions about what is good for us. What do you think? Am I wrong to think this is obvious? Second, I wonder about boundaries on this reality. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to get a free can of Coke. I like Coke. I would happily drink a Coke. I consider drinking a Coke to be a good thing. But I also need to lose weight. Coke has zero nutritional value. It's carbonated sugar water, pure empty calories. Drinking it would give me pleasure, but degrade my health, even if infinitesimally. So there I was, wanting to drink a can of Coke and not wanting to drink a can of Coke. Both appeared good to me. You may wonder where I'm going with this. Here it is. I've already suggested that it's obvious that different things appear good to different people. I've also illustrated how contrary things, in my case, drinking Coke and not drinking Coke, can appear good to a single person. Is it possible that the appearing to be good can be only that, an appearance, not a reality? We hit here upon a long-standing problem in philosophy, the difference between reality and appearance. Some will argue that there is no reality, only appearance. Others may argue that reality is so malleable that the plurality of conflicting appearances reflects an underlying multiplicity of realities. I think we'd be wrong to jump immediately to the conclusion that because different things appear good to different people, that it is the case that different things are necessarily good for different people in every case. I'd suggest further that we shouldn't jump immediately to the conclusion that it is their appearing good to us that makes them good. In an intermediate case, and that's as far as I care to go right now, I'll point out again to the hierarchical ordering of ends, of purposes. Considering my Coke, if the end I consider good is pleasing my taste, I'll consider drinking the Coke to be a good thing. If the end I consider good, however, is my health, I'll likely think not drinking the Coke is the good thing now. At some point in this process, I have to think about the hierarchy of ends as a whole, identifying how they relate to each other, and deliberating about which means are conducive to which ends. Chapter 5 begins with further modification of Aristotle's definition of virtue. He says, the end, then, being what we wish for, The means that we deliberate about and choose, actions concerning means, must be according to choice and voluntary. Now, the exercise of the virtues is concerned with means. Therefore, virtue also is in our power, and so too vice. This is a good time to remind you of our discussion of philosophical anthropology. When we consider humans, we observe that they have faculties of reasoning and faculties of willing, of using their will. Some approaches to anthropology will say our faculties of willing are merely apparent, not real. We seem to will, to choose, but we are really determined. Some of these will attribute our being determined and unable to really choose to the sovereignty of God. Others will attribute to the sovereignty of DNA, chemicals in our brain, or maybe to our environment. As I read Aristotle, I believe he would say that our faculties that lead to acts of will, of choice, are limited and constrained, but still real. But it's the same with our reasoning faculties. Our acts of reasoning, or since we've talked about it recently, let's use the word deliberating, they're real, but they are imperfect. As real and yet imperfect, there are at least some occasions where our acts or either deliberating or choosing can be evaluated and refined. This chapter, Aristotle is arguing that part of the nature of a virtue, a human excellence relative to some aspect of our lives as humans, is subject to choice. We form intentions and we act on them. When things are subject to choice and not determined by something outside our choice, then we can be accountable for them. I won't delve into accountability right now, but it is worth thinking about the networks of accountability in which we find ourselves. We are accountable in various ways to the people and institutions we are a part of. What are some important elements of your own network of accountability? Now that Aristotle has dealt with the background theory of virtue, he gives us some examples. Here in chapter 6, the example is courage. Courage is the mean, the midpoint between cowardice and rashness. When we are cowards, we are likely to avoid risk and danger. When we are rash, we run toward risk full speed ahead. One is a deficiency, one an excess. Courage, the proper evaluation of risk, is the mean. It lies at the midpoint between these two vices. Those of you who have experienced the virtue of courage know that there's more to being courageous than the accurate assessment of risk. We also have to assess ourselves. Aristotle thinks of courage being in situations where there is the opportunity of showing prowess or where death is noble. That's in 1115b, line 4, which sounds like warfare. Courage is required in many other kinds of situations also. I think of something as simple as driving in Houston. I went to high school in the Woodlands. When I was first starting out, I was a coward when it came to driving in places like Houston. After I gained more driving experience, I didn't give much thought to it. It just did it. It wasn't that the dangers and risks had changed. They hadn't, but I had. What may have been rash for me at 16 when I was first starting was perfectly normal for me when I was older. Aristotle spends a few chapters talking about courage. If you're interested in that virtue, go back and look at them all. After courage, he turns to the virtue of temperance. The Greek word for temperance is sophrosune. You see that first part, soph, as the same that we find as in the Greek word for wisdom, sophia. And of course, part of the word philosophy. The virtue of temperance is related to wise action with regard to pleasures. At 1117b, line 28, he claims that some pleasures relate to the body and some to the soul. He offers the love of honor and love of learning as some examples of the latter, of pleasures of the soul. At 1118a, line 2, he gets more specific, claiming that temperance must be concerned with bodily pleasures, but not all even of these. For those who delight in objects of vision, such as colors and shapes and painting, are called neither temperate nor self-indulgent. Further down in line 17, we find him saying, nor is there in animals other than humans any pleasure connected with these senses. He's mentioned by this time sight and hearing, except incidentally. What do you think about this claim? I know in our age we tend to anthropomorphize animals, especially those we keep as pets or that we see functioning as humanoids, like Bambi or Bugs Bunny. So it may seem odd to make such strong distinction between humans and non-human animals. From what we know of at least some animals today, it does seem that they take pleasure in various sights and sounds. When we consider birdsong and coloration as it functions in mating, that seems to be demonstrating an appreciation of sight and sound. Surely it is on a different level than it is for humans, but it shows some appreciation. What do you think? At 1119a, line 10, Aristotle says, temperate people occupy a middle position with regard to these objects, for they neither enjoy the things that the self-indulgent people enjoy most, but rather dislike them, nor in general the things that they should not, nor anything of this sort to excess, nor do they feel pain or craving when they are absent, or do so only to a moderate degree, and not more than they should, nor when they should not. Here we see how contextual the proper attitude and action toward pleasure is for Aristotle. When we are evaluating temperance, the wise action toward pleasure, we consider what is desired, how it is desired, and when it is desired. Let's consider eating. If I have a desire to eat dirt, if I find that pleasurable, there's something wrong with my mental faculties. There is no amount of dirt and no occasion at which the temperate person would eat dirt. But what about cheeseburgers? I love a good cheeseburger. I think desiring to eat a cheeseburger can be within the practice of temperance. But what about quantity? Because eating a cheeseburger is a good thing, perhaps not only for giving me pleasure, but for satisfying my hunger and giving me nutrition. That doesn't mean that it would be good or temperate for me to eat a cheeseburger at every meal or to eat multiple cheeseburgers at once. It can also be a matter of timing. Say that I'm working in my day job as a pastor and conducting a wedding. It would not be an act of temperance for me to let my desire for pleasure of eating a cheeseburger to make me stop the wedding so I can partake of one then and there. Aristotle says self-indulgence is more like a voluntary state than cowardice. Can you think of why Aristotle says this? Which of these two vices, self-indulgence, cowardice, usually requires more deliberation? Which might come more automatically? Is there a difference in the kind of deliberation and choice that leads to each?